So this is the second part of our discussion on Albert Camus' Nobel Prize acceptance speech. Well, uh, Albert Camus delivered the banquet speech, as you would remember, at the City Hall in the Swedish capital, Stockholm, on the 10th of December 1957. Well, this City Hall, as we have seen, is a major tourist attraction in Stockholm. So straight away, we'll pass on to the discussion of the short answer questions. Question number one. Why did Camus feel shocks and inner turmoil on knowing about the Nobel Prize to be given to him? Camus says the award is beyond his merits. He says he doesn't deserve it because there are a few reasons that he gives. Number one, he is young. Two, rich only in doubts. His mind is full of doubts, full of questions for which he is yet to get answers. His work's still in progress. He has not completed his works. He lives in the loneliness of his work. But suddenly, all of a sudden, he finds himself in the center of attraction. To accept the honor is very difficult, he says, because there are other more eligible writers in Europe who deserve an award like this more than he does. And his own native country is in trouble. Algeria is in trouble. Well, is engaged in the fight for independence. So, this is the reason why he felt shock and inner turmoil. Question two. What was the unending misery that the country of his birth was passing through at the time of the award of the Nobel Prize for Literature to Camus? At the time of the award of the prize in 1957, the Algerian War for Independence from France was going on. The National Liberation Front started a guerrilla war against France. And, that guerrilla warfare is known as the Battle of Algiers. And this is the unending misery of the country of his birth, referred to in his speech. Question number three. Why does Camus need art? Well, we come to the important part of his discussion. He starts talking about art. He tells us about art. Why does an artist like Camus need art? He says Camus needs art because art cannot be separated from his fellow men. It allows him to live on one level with them. Well, it levels, it unites him with his countrymen. It makes him one with his fellow countrymen. It also subjects him to the universal truth. Art can stir the greatest number of people by giving them a clear picture of common joys and sufferings. Well, this is a unifying factor. Art is a great unifying factor. It can stir, it can unite, it can organize the greatest number of people by giving them a clear picture of the common joys and sufferings of the people at large. Next question. Why does Camus say that the true artists scorn nothing and they are obliged to understand rather than to judge? Well, a true artist, he is not supposed to scorn. He is not supposed to judge. In fact, his duty is to understand, to sympathize with his fellow beings. Answer. A person chooses to be an artist only to be a different man. Well, because, artists, writers, they are all, very famous people. They are a class apart. They are the intelligentsia. So, A person chooses to be an artist, to be a different man. But remember, if that person cannot maintain his art has no life unless he is one with others, unless he is one with his fellow countrymen. That is why the artist scorns nothing. He is obliged to understand, not judge. He is not supposed to act as a judge. He is obliged to understand. He is obliged to sympathize with his fellow human beings. When will the writer be alone and deprived of his art? Well, when he loses connection, when he separates ties with his countrymen, when he chooses to be a different man, well, he'll be alone. From that moment onwards, he'll be alone and he'll be deprived of his art. Camus says that the writer's role is not free from difficulties. It's a very difficult task. The role of a writer is a very, very difficult one. He cannot serve the government and he has to serve the people. Well, now who should he side with? He should side with the people, not the ruling class, not the government. Otherwise, if he stands on the side of the government, on the ruling class, well, he'll be alone. He'll find himself, alone in the midst of the people, and he'll be deprived of his art. There'll be nobody to appreciate. There'll be nobody to encourage and appreciate his art. What draws the writer out of the exile? Well, he is a writer. An intellectual is always in an exile. He's lonely. He's solitary. He's in solitude. And what can draw the writer, the artist, out of his exile? Well, it is the silence of the unknown prisoner. Especially, during the freedom struggle, the ruling class, arrests and imprisons hundreds of thousands of people. And, for what? What is the crime that they have committed? Nobody knows. Well, for no fault of theirs. Only they fought for independence. So, the unknown prisoners. And there is, nobody can hear. Nobody can hear their cries. Nobody can hear, their complaints. So, it is complete silence. So, that silence, the silence of the unknown prisoner, who is abandoned to humiliations at the other end of the world. It is that silence that draws the writer out of his exile, out of his solitude. The writer should not forget the silence, and it is the duty of the writer to make it resound, to make it, to magnify that sound by means of his art. It is he should work as an amplifier. It is his duty to amplify that silence, to resound that silence by means of his art. How can the writer win the heart of a living community? Well, a writer, an artist, can win the heart of a living community by accepting two tasks. The writer, the artist, should be ready to accept two tasks. And it is these two tasks that constitute the greatness of his craft. Number one, the service of truth. Number two, the service of liberty. He should stand for truth, number one. Number two, he should also stand for liberty. Remember, the truth is one of the greatest weapons. Mahatma Gandhi, truth was one of the two weapons of Mahatma Gandhi. So it is one of the most powerful weapons in the world, the truth. The service of truth, number one. Number two, the service of liberty. What are the two commitments in which the nobility of the writer's craft is rooted? The two commitments of the artist, of the writer. The nobility of the writer's craft is rooted in two commitments. And remember, these two commitments are very, very difficult to maintain. Number one, the first is the refusal to tell lie. Don't tell lie. That is truth. Number one. Number two, the second is the resistance to oppression. Resistance to oppression, freedom, independence. Resist oppression, resist persecution. So, resist lie, resist oppression. These are the two things, two commitments that are very, very difficult to maintain. And these are the two things in which the writer's craft is rooted. What is the hidden feeling that supported Camus during the 20 years of insane history? The hidden feeling was a commitment to write. Well, he had a commitment to write. It was also a commitment to bear together what? With all those suffering men, to bear the misery and the hope that they shared, that the people shared, his fellow countrymen shared. What are the convulsions of the time that Camus is talking about? The convulsions of time. Convulsions of time, the troubles of time, the troubles and tribulations of time, the chaos of the time. He talks about the First World War, number 1. Number 2, Hitler. Number 3, the Spanish Civil War. Number 4, the Second World War, the concentration camps, the Europe of torture and prisons. Well, these are the convulsions of time that Camus is talking about. They are now supposed to bring up their children in the shadow of a nuclear war. Well, after all these things, the First World War, Hitler, the Spanish Civil War, the Second World War, concentration camps, the torture of Europe and the prisons and after all these things are over, well, there comes what? The shadow of a nuclear war. They are supposed to live in a perpetual shadow of the nuclear war. And, the most powerful countries in the world, they are competing with each other. They are engaged in the research to produce the most powerful weapon, which is able to destroy the world at the shortest, in the shortest time, in the shortest possible time. So, they are now supposed to bring up their children in the shadow of nuclear war. So, it is a perpetual misery. What is the quest for legitimacy that the people are engaged in? The quest for legitimacy that the people are engaged in, according to Camus. The people have refused nihilism. They have refused nihilism. Now they are engaged in the quest for legitimacy, because they know people, his fellow countrymen, they no longer believe that life is meaningless. They no longer believe that life has nothing to offer, nihilism. But now they are engaged in the quest for legitimacy. And what are they engaged in? They are engaged in the art of living. Now, how a person will be able to live in time of disaster? This is what they are looking for. This is the people of his generation are looking for, to be reborn and to work against the instinct of death. The instinct of death that is very, very active today. Because as I said earlier, the nations, the most powerful nations of the world, they are engaged in a research to produce the most powerful weapon, the weapon that can destroy the world in the shortest possible time. So the instinct of death that is very, very active today. Now the people of his generation, they are engaged in the art of living, and they are trying to find out how we will be able to live in this time of catastrophe, in these catastrophic times. What is the greater task of his generation has got to do? His generation has a greater task of preventing the world from destroying itself. That is the greatest task. That is to stop the world from destroying itself. It has to re-establish what? The dignity of life and the dignity of death. To restore peace among nations, that's a very, very difficult task. Because this was the time of the Second World War. Almost all the countries of the world were fighting against each other. So restoration of peace among nations is one of the foremost duties. To reconcile labor and culture, and to remake what? The rule of law. That's a great task. Who does Camus dedicate his Nobel Prize? Now he says, I accept this honor. I accept this honor on behalf of my people. And he dedicates his Nobel Prize to the people of his generation. To his generation. The generation that is engaged in the greater task of preventing the world from destroying itself. It has to re-establish what? The dignity of life and death. The life and death had lost all its dignity. Now it is the duty of the present generation. The present generation is engaged in the task of re-establishing the dignity of life and death, trying to restore peace among nations and reconcile labor and culture and remake the rule of law. Well, there was chaos, complete chaos. Now instead of chaos, they are trying to re-establish what? The rule of law. And he's ready. He says he's dedicating this Nobel Prize to those people, the people of his generation, who are engaged in the greater task of preventing the world from destroying itself, the people who are trying to re-establish the dignity of life and death, the people who are trying to restore peace among nations, the people who are trying to reconcile labor and culture and remake the rule of law. What exactly is a writer according to Camus? The writer is like any other comrade in arm. Any other comrade in arm. He is vulnerable. Well, he is at risk. But obstinate, very stubborn, unyielding, unjust. Others might feel, well, fighting a man in arm, he's unjust. No, but he's impassioned for justice. He's impassioned for, very urgent for justice. He wants to see that justice is established and devoted. He's bent on doing what? Erecting artworks. Artworks in the destructive movement of history to protect the earth. He must march towards the goals of truth, liberty, truth and liberty. It's very difficult, painfully, but resolutely, stubbornly, obstinately, resolutely. 15. How does Camus treat the honor, the Nobel Prize bestowed upon him? Camus receives the Nobel Prize as an honor given to all his comrades, all the people who are fighting for the things that we discussed a little while ago, who have not received any privilege. Well, they are living in misery, and they have known only misery and persecution in their life. So he believes that this honor he is bestowing upon the people who have received nothing but misery and persecution in their life. He is dedicating his honor to all those comrades. Now I think we will discuss the paragraph questions and their answers. Question number 1. Well, put together these ideas that we have discussed. What is Camus' idea of art? Camus says he cannot live without his art. He needs art because it allows him to live on one level with his fellow men, with his fellow men. Art can stir the greatest number of people by giving them a clear picture of common joys and sufferings. Art makes the artist one with others. Well, it removes the difference. It removes the discrimination that exists among people. It's a great leveler. It makes artists one with others. A person chooses to be an artist only to be a different man, but he cannot maintain his art unless he is one with others. That is why the true artist scorns nothing. He is obliged to understand, not judge. Never judge others. Try to understand others. Try to sympathize with others. The artist takes sides in this world only with the society, not support the government, not take sides with the government, take sides with the society, the people, his fellow countrymen. What is the writer's role? What is the role of the writer? The role of the writer is a very, very difficult one. He should serve the people, not the government. Otherwise, he will be alone. Well, if he starts supporting the government, the ruling class, he will be alone with no art. The armies of tyranny, the armies of persecution, they will not free him from his isolation. Now, what will free him from his isolation? The silence of an unknown prisoner. The silence of the unknown prisoner left to live in humiliation is powerful enough. That will end the writer's exile, isolation. While enjoying the freedom, he should not forget. He should not forget that silence. The silence of the unknown prisoner, soldier. He should make that silence resound. Well, he should magnify it. He should work as an amplifier to resound that silence of the unknown soldier everywhere by means of his art. He should tell the world about the silence of the unknown prisoner. None of us is great enough for such a task. What is the task? Oh, it's a very, very difficult task, he says that. The task of the writer is a very, very difficult one. What's it? The writer's task is to make the silence of the unknown prisoner resound, to amplify the silence everywhere, all over the world, by means of his art. But it is not easy. He can win the heart of people only by accepting two tasks. A writer should accept, an artist should accept two tasks. First, the service of truth. Second, the service of liberty. The writer's task is to unite maximum people. Well, this is his duty, to organize people, to unite people. So his art must not compromise with lies and servitude. Lie, resist lies. Servitude, resist servitude. Support truth and freedom. Now these two things, lies and servitude, they breed solitude, loneliness. They put you, they make you lonely. The nobility of the writer's craft is rooted in two difficult things. What are the two difficult things? Number one, refuse to tell lie. Number two, resist oppression. Camus' idea of a writer. The writer's role is a very, very difficult one. He should serve the people, not the government. Otherwise, he'll be alone, with no art. Only the silence of the unknown prisoner, who is left to live in humiliation. The unknown prisoner who lives in humiliation, his silence can serve him from exile. He should make that silence resound everywhere by means of his art. To win the heart of the people, he should accept two tasks. Number one, the service of truth. Number two, the service of liberty. The writer's task is to unite the maximum people. The nobility of the writer's craft is rooted in two very, very difficult commitments. One, refusal to tell lie. Two, resistance to oppression. What does Camus say about the life of his generation in the convulsions of time? The convulsions of time in the First World War, the Spanish War, the Second World War, the concentration camps, the prisons, and all those things. Like others of his generation, he survived the dark periods of life by a feeling that to write today was also a commitment to bear together with them the misery and hope. These men, these fellow countrymen who faced the worst trials in their life, like number one, two world wars, Spanish Civil War, concentration camps, and prisons. They are supposed to bring up their children in the shadow of another war, another perennial threat, that is the nuclear war. They cannot be blamed if they become nihilists, if they lose their hope, if they believe that their life is meaningless. You cannot blame them. However, they are now engaged in something positive, in learning to live in disaster. They are now trying to learn to live in disaster, to work against the instinct of death that is very, very active today. Why does Camus dedicate the Nobel Prize to his generation? His generation has a greater task. Well, his generation, the people of his generation, has a great responsibility. The responsibility of preventing the world from destroying itself, because the world is engaged in a competition, a very fierce competition, a competition to totally destroy the world at the shortest possible time. A generation. This is a generation that has a corrupt history, a distorted history, lost revolutions, crazy technology, dead gods, and outdated ideologies. It has to accomplish the immense task of restoring peace among nations. It also has to reconcile labor and culture and remake the rule of law. Everywhere it is rising to the challenge of truth and liberty. It is ready to die for it. The world, the world in general, the people in general are ready to die for what? To challenge the truth of, to take up the challenge of truth and liberty. It deserves to be respected, saluted. He dedicates his Nobel Prize to this generation, to the people of this generation. What is the proper place assigned to the writer by Camus? The writer is just like any other comrade in arms, vulnerable but obstinate, unjust but impassioned for justice, and doing his work without shame or pride. He is devoted to erect artworks to stop the destructive movement of history. The writer must march towards the goals of truth and liberty. Remember, failures are sure to come. But Camus says he never gave up the light, the pleasure of being, and the freedom. This nostalgia gave him more clarity to his art, to his craft. It will help him, it still helps him to support those silent men who live through memory of brief and free happiness. Well, this is the end of our discussion. This is the end of our discussion on the Nobel Prize acceptance speech by Albert Camus on the 10th of December 1957. So thank you very much. Thank you.